the 12 disciples of Jesus? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Luke on Walking Through the Bible.
The honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Luke chapter 6. We're going to be reading from verses 12 to 19. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Luke chapter 6, beginning at verse 12. Now it came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray, and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles. Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who also became a traitor. And he came down with them, and stood on a level place with a crowd of his disciples, and a great multitude of people from all Judea and Jerusalem, and from the sea coasts of Tyre and Sidon, who came to hear him, and be healed of their diseases, as well as those who were tormented with unclean spirits. And they were healed. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for power went out from him, and healed them all. In our last lesson, we had Jesus teaching an important lesson, that the Sabbath day under the law of Moses was not meant to constrict man from doing what God considered good, neither was it to constrict man from loving his neighbor as himself. The Jews of that day had improperly interpreted the law, but since Jesus was Lord of the Sabbath, in other words, he was God, he could correctly interpret it for them. Coming down to verse 12, we find all of the disciples of Jesus finally named for us in Luke. In Luke, we've only expressly seen Jesus call 4 disciples by name, though from Matthew and Mark we know that Andrew would have been called as well, though he has not been named by Luke yet. But who are these men? Well, a few of them we know a great deal about, while some of them we hardly know anything about. Whenever a list of apostles is given, invariably Peter is always listed at the top. Some believe that this means he was the most important apostle, but nowhere in Scripture does Jesus ever say this, nor does Peter ever say this. Peter, we know, is the most outspoken of the apostles, and is the one who confessed that Jesus was the Son of God, as we saw in our study of Matthew 16, so this is likely the reason he is placed first. Peter was from Bethsaida, as John 1 tells us. He preached the first sermon on the day of Pentecost, preached to the first Gentile converts to Christ in Acts 10, and was the writer of 1st and 2nd Peter. Andrew is Peter's brother, and according to John 1, he is the one who identified Jesus to Peter as the Messiah. James and John were also brothers, sons of Zebedee. In Mark, we learn that Jesus gives these 2 men nicknames, referring to them as sons of thunder. James would become the first apostle to be martyred for the name of Christ in Acts 12, while John would be the last apostle to die near the close of the 1st century. James did not write any of the books of the Bible, while John wrote the Gospel of John, the epistles of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, as well as the book of Revelation. Peter, Andrew, James, and John could be considered Jesus' inner circle, as they are often mentioned of together, although it will only be Peter, James, and John who would see Jesus transfigured in Luke chapter 9. Next, we have listed Philip and Bartholomew. Philip is not the same Philip we see in Acts 8, but he is the same Philip who in John 1 went and told Nathanael about Jesus. It is believed that Nathanael and Bartholomew are the same man, with Nathanael being like Peter and Matthew, a man with 2 names. Next, we have Matthew and Thomas. Matthew is a tax collector and the one who wrote the book of Matthew. Thomas is best remembered for not initially believing the accounts of Jesus' resurrection until he saw Jesus, at which point he believed. Of the next 3 apostles, we know hardly anything about them from Scriptures. We have James the son of Alphaeus, sometimes referred to as James the Less, possibly due to his height and to distinguish him from the other James. From Mark 2, we found that Levi, or Matthew, was the son of Alphaeus as well, and so if this was the same Alphaeus, that would make Matthew and James brothers, and thus the 3rd set of siblings among the 12 apostles of Jesus. However, since Mark did not identify Levi and James the Less as brothers, yet does for Peter and Andrew along with James and John, it is therefore quite probable that they weren't brothers, but simply men who had fathers with the same name. Following James, we have Simon the Zealot, who in Mark is known as Simon the Canaanite. And then we have a man who is also known as Judas, who is the son of or brother of James, depending on how you translate that section. He is also known as Lebbaeus in the book of Matthew, or Thaddeus in the book of Mark. That we don't know much about these 3 apostles is not to diminish their significance, but simply state that the scriptures don't speak much about their work. And after these 11, we finally come to the betrayer, or the traitor, Judas Iscariot. He is always listed last in the list of the apostles in the Gospels, and always with his epitaph, the traitor or betrayer of Christ. Prophecy said that one of the Messiah's followers would betray him, and thus a man with a heart who would do just that, namely Judas, was selected. If you take a look at these 12 men, you'd find that they all came from different backgrounds, different jobs, and each had a different character. Jesus selected them not because they were perfect, for they were far from that, but because they were teachable, and would thus be valuable either to him and his mission, or as in the case of all except Judas, the spread of the gospel. Coming now down to verses 17 to 19, we find that when Jesus came down from the mountain that he was in verse 12, that many people from all over Judea and Jerusalem, even as far as Tyre and Sidon, came to him on the plain to be healed and have their demons cast out. Luke tells us that Jesus healed them all, showing us the compassion that he had towards his fellow man. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Luke chapter 6, verses 20 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.